Hello everyone. This podcast is going to be about the classification of physical evidence. What we mean by physical evidence is the stuff that you collect from the crime scene. So that would be blood, hairs, fibers, flecks of paint, soil samples, really anything can be considered physical evidence. So it's all that stuff that you collect. The first thing we're going to talk about is why, collect that evidence at all. And the first reason is for its identification. Okay, so, for example, you found this bag of white powder at a crime scene, and you want to know what exactly it is. So what is this? The second thing you want to know is where did it come from? What's its source? If you can figure out those two things, you have very important clues in your case. Okay? So for example, if you figured out that the white powder was cocaine, and that would tell you that you're in a situation where drugs are involved, and be a drug buster or something of that sort. And where did it come from? If you can track the source of that cocaine, then it could help you track down, suspects. It could link you to victims. It can really tell you a lot of different information just knowing where that, stuff came from. The second reason we would collect physical evidence is to compare the samples you've collected. So we're going to write compare to something called a standard. And what a standard is a sample or object whose origin is known. Right, so what we can do is we can compare what we've collected to something that we know to see if it came from the same source. So for example, let's say that we collected a blood sample from the victim, and we had some blood spatter on the wall. And what we can do is compare them to see if this blood spatter on the wall, right, came from the victim. Now, when we're looking at physical evidence, there's some characteristics of that evidence we can use to tell us if we can figure out its source or not. Right? The first type of characteristics are individual characteristics. And these are characteristics of the piece of evidence that can be linked to a source with a high degree of certainty. Okay, so you're pretty sure you know where that piece of evidence came from. You know its source. So for example, DNA evidence. We can sequence DNA. We could take DNA swabs from suspects and victims, and we can match those. So we can be fairly certain if we have a DNA sample that that DNA sample, where that DNA sample came from. The other type of characteristic is a class characteristic. Now these are characteristics that can only be linked to a group. Right, so for example, let's say you found a piece of paper at a crime scene, so like this notebook paper here. Now you could potentially figure out, the brand that this paper was from, it's notebook paper, so you might be able to narrow down that this paper came from people who used this particular brand or were using notebook paper, which is pretty much everyone. But the idea behind a class characteristic is it's only for a group. It's not a specific like individual. You can only tie it to a group of people. Right. Now, most of the physical evidence that you collect at the scene, you're not going to be able to link directly to a person. Most of it's going to be class evidence when you first find it. But as you do more research, you can collect more individual characteristics about it. Right, and the more of those that you have, the more certain you can be where that piece of evidence came from. Okay, so for example, if you had a soil sample, at first you would collect the soil sample, right? You could tell its composition, you can do some tests for that, so you may be able to figure out, okay, where did this soil sample come from, in the United States? Right? But then as you probe further, you do more tests, you might find something unique in that particular soil sample. So perhaps it is more acidic, perhaps it has a certain metal in it or mineral. And then you can start to narrow down where that soil sample came from. Okay, so for most evidence, it's going to start off as class when you first find it, right? But as you find more information about it, it's going to be individualized.